This is chapter 8, Launching a New Nation, and this is when President Washington takes office. So the focus question for this section is, how did President Washington set the course for the new nation? These are our key terms. All right, so the first nation's capital was in New York City. And George Washington travels. So after the war, he kind of was like, all right, man, I'm done. Peace out. I'm going home. He goes home. And for roughly a decade, he's just doing his thing in, Virginia. And when we are operating underneath this new constitution, they were like, hey, so yeah, by the way, we we kind of need you to be a president. Thanks so much for that. And his inauguration actually happened in April, April 30th, 1789. And Washington was still like, um, I don't, I don't even really know what this is. Like, I am, this is literally brand new. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Do any of you have any idea what you're doing? And they were all like, nah, we don't know. Sorry, dude. I don't know what's going on. And if you look towards the Constitution, all it really does is put the basics. I mean, like, you're like, okay, yes, we have our branches. Um, what do we do past that? So, the first job of the federal government is to create a government. Like, when Washington takes office, the entire federal government is 75 post offices, a few clerks, and 672 total soldiers. Like, we ain't got nothing. And so we got to set up a working government. First, our Congress um, sets up different departments for the executive branch. So the Constitution does not lay this out, but it makes a lot more sense to, kind of put people who are experts in each field in these different offices. I'm sorry, y'all, I'm sick. So you have the Secretary, I'm sorry, you have the Department of Treasury, which is then led by the Secretary of the Treasury. You have the Department of State, which is led by the Secretary of State. And you have, at this point in time, the Department of War, led by the Secretary of War. I know, it's shocking. We also have, and we still have this position today, the Attorney General. And it's almost like an attorney for the government, but not really. It's kind of, you don't really need to know about that. It's mainly just like legal matters. Can I do this? Like, does the Constitution allow me to do this? And Washington chooses Alexander Hamilton to be Secretary of the Treasury. He chooses Thomas Jefferson to become Secretary of State. Now, keep in mind, Jefferson has been in France for a while as ambassador, so it makes sense that he would be part of the diplomatic. He would be head of the diplomatic foreign service. And Henry Knox, if you might recognize the phrase Fort Knox, that's named after Henry Knox. He becomes our Secretary of War. A man named Edmund Randolph, who you should recognize from the last chapter, but I don't know if you will. He becomes the Attorney General. And this group of individuals is called the Cabinet. Back in the day, like a cabinet was actually like a room. It wasn't just like a little box on the wall. You would go to your own cabinet when you had like that. This is where your closest friends and your closest, I guess, people who could see you without the whole ceremonial, whatever that you would have to put on in everyday life. These people would talk with you in your cabinet. So that's where it kind of gets this idea, or that's how it gets its title. The Judiciary Act of 1789 actually provides for a Supreme Court. I mean, in the Constitution, it's like, hey, you have one, you have a court. That's a whole thing. Figure it out, guys. I mean, it's a little bit more, involved than that, but kind of not. Like, They're like, this is a court. You're going to have one that's the supreme, and then you've got all the others. Have fun. Um, so the Judiciary Act of 1789, like I said, it makes a Supreme Court of 6 justices. And the Supreme Court at this point in time, they do what's called riding circuit, meaning that these justices would also go and hear cases on a certain route, and that would be the circuit that they were hearing cases on. There were 13 district courts, and really and truly, your main job of the federal court at the time was to hear appeals from your state courts. You have, this hierarchy where you got to start small and move higher. Our first Supreme Court justice, our first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, my bad, was John Jay. And we are going to talk about John Jay. If you paid attention to Hamilton, you'll know that he wrote some of the Federalist Papers before he got sick. Yeah, so John Jay. There's also a law school called John Jay College of School of Law, I think. Yeah. So here we are. Don't they look awesome? Okay, so I made this PowerPoint a very long time ago, and I cannot remember why it's tilted. I'm sure there was like a very good stylistic purpose behind it, but I don't remember what it is. And Henry Knox here, he looks a little chubby. Okay, economic crisis. To fight a war, one goes into debt. It's very expensive. At the end of the American Revolution, the federal government, which, mind you, did not really exist before the American Revolutionary War, owed $52 million. And this debt was actually in the form of bonds. So a bond, it's almost like a note where the government says, "Hi, you have extra money and we need that extra money. How about we agree that you will pay me $10, and in 10 years, I will pay you $10 plus interest." So that would be a bond. The government then goes and spends that $10 because they got to do stuff. And you still have this note that says, in 10 years, the government has to pay you back. Now, it's kind of risky if you do not have confidence in the government because, you're just giving them money in the hopes that they will still be solvent at the end of this time that they say they're going to pay you back. But it's a very good way for a country to raise money when it is in a wartime. So a speculator, it sounds fancier than it is. Speculators are people who then go and here. Okay, so the way I'm trying to explain this, I hope I am not complicating things. Basically, if I go and I pay this $10 and I'm like, yay, I have a bond, cool. Say in 5 years, I am like poor, poor, poor. And I'm like, oh, it would be so nice if I had my $10 back. It would be nice if I just had $5 back. Like, I don't even want the whole thing. I am in that, dire of financial straits. So a speculator might come to me and say, all right, I know, like if you wait until the end of the 10 years, you're going to get, your $10 plus interest. That's true. Everybody knows that. But how about I pay you $5 now, and then the risk is on me. I am taking the risk that not only do I, um, like I'm taking the risk because I still have money invested in this scheme. And you're like, okay, well, I need the money now. Who cares if I don't get the full amount back? I don't even know if like this government's going to exist in 5 more years. So I'm going to take my money and run. But your speculators are the ones who are come in and they're like, hi, how about we pay you a little bit of it? Because we are then taking on the risk. So we're not going to pay you all of it. But if at the end of this 10 years time, We go in, we can cash in the bond, and we will make our money. So people who are speculators are people who have capital, which is basically money, and they are going through finding the bondholders and they are speculating that in a few more years they're going to be able to get the full cost of the bond back. The government at this point in time is they do not have any money. You know, if you think about back under the Articles of Confederation, there was no way to tax. So the federal government, the best they had was selling the land in the old Northwest, and that was all they really could do to raise money. And that land is a finite resource. As once they run out, they run out. So at this point in time, they are trying to figure out a way to get money. And I'm sorry, I lost track of what I was saying. But I mean, the budget is so low that George Washington has to pay his own moving expenses. That definitely would not be happening today. All right, so Alexander Hamilton, he was really, really annoying as a person. People did not like him. He was off putting, but he was off putting because he was very intelligent and he had no patience for people who could not follow his reasoning, the way he was thinking, and he had to work hard to gain every single step that he got in his life. And so he's like, okay, a bunch of you people at first, you had a whole lot more than I ever got. So why are you so lazy and stupid? But he comes up with this plan. His plan has three parts. He wants to, one, have the US government assume all federal and state debts. The second part is he wants the US government to charter a national bank for as a depositing place for government funds. And he wants the government to impose a high tax on goods imported into the country. This is usually termed a tariff. Hamilton knows that paying this debt is going to be problematic for the US government, but he wanted to prove that the government is sound, it can be counted on to pay back its debts. It doesn't seem to make much sense, but in order to gain credit, you first have to go into debt. And so you go into debt, then you pay off that debt, and people say, hey, look at that. We can give this entity, this person, whatever, we can give them credit because we see that they will pay off the debt that they owe. And so Hamilton is like, look, we got to show the world that we're good for this money. That way, people will then be willing to invest in not only our government, but also in our economy. The southern states are not on board with this. They are kind of butthurt because they already paid their war debt. They were like, we paid this already. Why do we then have to be part of something that assumes the war debt from a state like, say, New York? Why can't they pay their own war debt? That's kind of not seeing the forest for the trees. They're unwilling to see the future because the only thing that they want to pay attention to is, oh, well, we're the ones that like we're going to get hurt right now. And it's like, yeah, that you might have to deal with a little bit of hurt right now, but if you just wait a second and, think about it a little bit, you can see that in the long run it will end up paying off in the end. Ultimately, Congress debates this plan for 6 months in 1790. Eventually, there is an agreement that is reached. And this is kind of, it honestly happens in a back room. Like Thomas Jefferson has a dinner, Alexander Hamilton goes to said dinner, and suddenly you have a bunch of Southerners who are like, yeah, we totally should pay off all the war debt. And funny enough, the nation's capital gets located in the South. Today, we don't really think of DC as the South, but it's on land donated from the states of Maryland and Virginia, and this area was definitely considered Southern back in the day. So, because of this, the capital is situated on the Potomac River, and this is actually like this is going to pump a whole lot of money into the economies of both of these states. Let me see. Make sure I've covered everything. Oh, okay. So if we look at the National Bank, Thomas Jefferson is very much against the bank. Um, Hamilton wants to have a privately owned bank called the Bank of the United States. No one's getting fancy with naming. And this is a place where the government can deposit their funds. It can issue paper money. This will be the national currency. So now we don't have these competing currencies from the different states. And while Jefferson and Hamilton, they're not really, they don't see eye to eye on a lot of things politically, but especially here, Jefferson says that establishing a bank is unconstitutional, that you cannot do this because the Constitution does not say that you can. Let me see if I go on to the next. Here we go. That's what I thought. He says you cannot do it because it's not constitutional. Now, Jefferson is a politician who is in favor of a strict interpretation of the Constitution. That means you have to look at exactly the language in the document. If the Constitution does not say the federal government can create a national bank, then you're not allowed to do it. Period. End of story. That's what Jefferson believes. Hamilton, however, says, and now keep in mind too, Jefferson was not at the Constitutional Convention, and Alexander Hamilton was, but he says that there's a clause in the Constitution called the Necessary and Proper Clause. It's at the end of the, I guess, like right before the Bill of Rights, and it says the government can do anything that is necessary and proper for the running of the country, basically. It's Article 1, Section 8. And Hamilton says because of this, there are things that the national government can do that is not explicitly spelled out there because it is necessary and proper for us to do these things. In 1791, Congress does pass the law establishing the bank, and President Washington signs this law. But this conflict between what is, should we be strict constructionalists or should we go for a more loose interpretive understanding of the Constitution, these are still debated to this day. You have a lot of people who make their career debating strict versus loose constructionalist. The part of Hamilton's plan that Congress does not get on board for was the tariff on imported goods. The proceeds of this tariff are supposed to go to the federal government. So any money made from this tariff goes to the federal government. And Hamilton's idea is that we need to protect our baby U.S. manufacturing interests by keeping cheaper foreign goods out of the market. The Southerners, once again, are opposing this part of Hamilton's plan. And they're not wrong in the way they do this. They import most of their stuff from Europe. It's just the way their region runs. A lot of the manufactured goods that are, made in America, they're made in the Northeast. And as long as our transportation networks are not very well developed, the American made stuff's going to be more expensive for your Southerners. And they're like, we don't want to be punished simply because, y'all haven't gotten your act together and built roads. Like, that's not fair for all of us. And we've already given in on a couple of other things that we weren't so happy about. So Congress does not pass this tariff. And that's because they said that the tariff is only going to help the North and it's going to punish your Southerners. All right, so your Whiskey Rebellion. In 1791, Congress decides that they're going to tax all of the whiskey made and sold in the United States. Hamilton thinks, hey, this is going to be great. It will raise money for the Treasury. And we should have learned. We don't like taxes. We don't like them. We just don't like them, especially don't like taxes on alcohol. So a lot of our backcountry farmers, and remember, at this point in time, your backcountry is really the region that we would think of as kind of along the Appalachian Mountains. Um, they make extra money by turning any kind of excess corn crop into whiskey. Makes sense. People like whiskey. It also keeps the corn from spoiling. They do not care for this whiskey tax. These farmers, once again, compare this new tax to the taxes from Britain. And a whole lot of these farmers in what we would think of what they thought of as the interior, they are protesting against it. They're like, we're not going to pay this. When officials in Western Pennsylvania try to collect the tax, the farmers burn down the home of a tax collector. Like they did not hide the lead here. There's an angry mob marching through Pittsburgh, and everyone's like, oh, this is unfortunate. But President Washington gets on his horse and he sends the militia to Pennsylvania. Um, they, like 13,000 troops, march into Pennsylvania and put down this rebellion. Now, Washington does pardon all of these people who are rebelling. This is great optics for him because it shows him to be magnanimous and forgiving and respecting, the ability to protest your government, but still staying in the government. So he's like, you're not trying to overthrow the government. You're just telling us what you think with fire and, effigies. Um, Ultimately, this is testing the will of our new government. Is it going to hold? And it does. Washington, him going out and being like, no, you can't do this. It shows your Americans that we don't do that. We don't do armed rebellion. Thank you. That is for those classless people who don't know any better. But as Americans, we understand that that's not cool. And you can protest, you can talk about what you think is wrong, but there is a way we do things in this country, and it is through democracy. It's not just let's start burning everything to the ground. All right, that's the end of the first section.